ChatGPT affect the human minds that engage with it? You're asking the right girl, because I'm Rachel, the neuroscientist. There are a handful of studies that purport to investigate that very question, and at least to my knowledge, I've read all of them. Every single study in the history of human science has limitations. That isn't a criticism, doesn't mean it's garbage. You don't solve science in a single study. In these cases, in most of these studies, it goes beyond simple study limitations. They're not generating findings we can actually use to generalise to the real world context or even to build upon with further study. The mistakes that we're making as researchers look remarkably similar to the mistakes we made with the last intellectual technology and the one before that and the one. It's almost like a perfect echo each time. The things that people worry about, addiction, immoral behaviour, the intellectual technology obviously supplants a task. It's doing a task, and we always assume that reduced effort will lead to atrophy of our brains, like critical thinking, for example. Spoiler alert, it never fucking turns out to be that. No, it always turns out to be a far bigger, more pernicious problem that beyond a certain threshold is too big to contend with. Like, to give you an example, if you look at the internet, we were really worried that digital access to information, people won't use their memories because they won't have to. They can look things up. So we faffed about in those early years as a society and also as researchers, focusing on all the wrong things. While we weren't looking and had our pants down, misinformation entered the chat and techno-feudalism. What really hit it home for me was the discovery that in the 18th century, when books started to become really popular, moral panic swept across the cultural elites because people were worried that young folks were becoming addicted to reading books. That really hit it home for me because obviously it's a perception shift. Now reading is a very socially desirable behaviour. There was a presumption that reading too many books would lead you to lose your capacity to think, and that you would be dragged headlong into depravity, promiscuity, and such like. I want you to think about the kinds of concerns people are sharing about ChatGPT. It is almost a perfect echo. Intellectual technologies are not a drug you can administer and then measure its effect. And that's the way it's been treated in research. That's one of many problems, by the way. That's not the only issue with these studies. Intellectual technologies are hella complex. They completely shift human environments and, as a result, human behaviour. What tends to be the case is that there will be larger kind of society-wide effects on human life that are pretty much universal. And then on a smaller scale, different use cases, and then with each use case, completely different context, then different set of outcomes for the humans engaging in those use cases. So fire, for example, our discovery of it obviously significantly advanced human society, changed the trajectory of our evolution, guts, biomes and stuff. And then on an individual level, it can cook your dinner or burn your village down. The same is very likely to be true with ChatGPT. And step one, it's like we need to do early phase discovery. If we're truly concerned about the potential harm of this intellectual technology, this is our window of opportunity. We're in it and we're wasting time. We cannot generate hypotheses based on presumptions. We need to justify them with prior findings. That isn't because I'm like a stick in the mud and a traditionalist. It's because it protects us from ourselves. That's what the scientific method is there for. Human brains are predictably not objective readers of reality. That's why we have the scientific method. And if you're thinking, but we don't have much from which to form hypotheses upon. We don't have much information to work with. Correct. It's supposed to force us to do the kind of less sexy ground level research. How are people using LLMs? And among those different use cases, which are the more prevalent? Like, what's the most common use? We don't know what we don't know. So we need those observational studies to be confronted with stuff we never would have thought of. Like, I know it feels like common sense to assume that using an LLM will diminish critical thinking. I know it feels like common sense. I know it feels intuitive. That is why, we make the same mistake with every intellectual technology. It always feels intuitive at the time. Remember the books example, right? It always feels like common sense. But if it didn't turn out to be a useful line of inquiry the first 50 times, it felt like common sense. It's unlikely that this will be the one time that escapes that formula. Even just working with the information that we currently have, which is not much, there are already more plausible outcomes on the horizon. It seems likely that it's going to entirely reshape education as we know it. Not only structurally education will change, like at the point of service, how we deliver it, but also I think now we're probably going to see a very different cognitive profile rise to the top. We're going to see different kinds of learners rise to the top. And I presume also learners who were formerly favoured by typical classroom teaching will probably struggle the most. You just imagine how that will change society profoundly. If you're interested in hearing me expand upon that theory, I'd be happy to make another video, but this one's already very long. How does ChatGPT affect the human